He used to call me his rock. Said I was the one who always showed up. But when my plane landed and the airport doors slid open, I realized something I should have seen years ago. He didn't forget me. He left me. And that was the day I stopped waiting to be remembered and started remembering myself. Joanne Mitchell had never thought she'd have to teach her heart how to let go of her only son. Back when Eric was little, she worked overtime as a school teacher, grading papers at midnight, selling handmade crafts on weekends, just to afford the good sneakers the other boys at school wore. She gave up her bedroom for him during the divorce. Gave up dating, too, when he said, "I just want it to be us, Mom." She never hesitated. When he had his first big business idea at 25, she smiled through the bank's warning and cashed out a portion of her retirement. "He's a dreamer," she told the manager, "and dreamers need wings." She never told Eric what it cost, how she went without a second car, how she stretched meals, how she stayed in a job she hated 5 years longer than planned. And when the business failed, she didn't say, "I told you so." She hugged him, said, "We'll find another way." When he bought his first house, she co-signed. Not because he needed help, he said, but because it'd be easier for the bank to approve. The paperwork was in both their names. She never questioned it. She didn't track the thousands she gave or the nights she stayed awake worrying about how he'd pay it all back. Because that's what mothers do. They catch. They cover. They carry. Eric used to say she was the strongest woman he knew, and that was enough for her, for years. Enough to overlook the credit card in his name linked to her account. Enough to forgive the messages that said, "Can you just transfer $300 real quick?" Without even a hi. She thought her love would be remembered, that loyalty would mean something. But that was before the airport. Before she stood under flickering lights with her suitcase in one hand and a sinking truth in the other. She had never been seen, only used. And maybe that's what hurt the most. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. Joanne glanced out the window as the desert sun cast long shadows across the Albuquerque tarmac. Her hands smoothed the front of her coat. After 3 hours in the air, her back ached, but her heart was light. Eric had insisted she come. "It won't feel like Christmas without you, Mom." She imagined him waiting by the arrivals curb, waving with that half smile of his. Maybe he'd bring her a peppermint latte like he used to. She smiled at the thought. But when the plane doors opened and she stepped into the harsh airport light, there was no wave. No voice calling out, "Mom!" Just the buzz of strangers and the cold kiss of dry air. Joanne waited. At first, she told herself the traffic must be awful, that maybe he parked in the wrong zone. She checked her phone. No missed calls, no texts. She dialed. 4 rings, voicemail. A minute later, a text buzzed through. "Sorry, Mom, meeting stacked today. Can you Uber? I'll make it up to you. Love ya." Joanne read it twice. She stared out the glass doors at the pickup zone, at cars sweeping by, each filled with someone who hadn't been forgotten. She clutched the handle of her suitcase a little tighter. Her other hand grazed the edge of her wedding ring, still on her finger after all these years. She didn't cry. She just walked, out into the desert air, alone. The Uber ride was silent, except for the driver tapping on his GPS and humming to himself. Joanne sat stiffly in the back seat, watching her city blur past. It used to feel like home. Now it felt like someone else's life. At a red light, she opened Facebook. The first thing on her feed, a live video from Eric, a housewarming party, music blaring, people laughing, balloons, champagne. Eric grinning into the camera, raising a toast in the living room of a house she recognized. The house, he said, was tied up in a new investment, the one she had co-signed to help him buy. He didn't even glance at his phone. Joanne lowered hers slowly. The cab turned down her street. If you've ever stood in a place where you once felt loved and realized you were just convenient, then you know what Joanne felt right then. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something like this. Not anger, Not heartbreak, just that bone-deep hollowness. When love isn't lost, it's discarded, and the person who discarded it is celebrating without even noticing you're missing. The house hadn't changed much. Same chipped bricks, same porch light that flickered when it rained. Joanne stood there for a moment before opening the door. Not because she forgot her keys, but because something inside her felt foreign. She stepped into the quiet. The air smelled like cinnamon and old paper. Her suitcase thudded gently against the wall as she set it down. She moved through the rooms slowly, not like someone coming home, but like someone stepping through an old dream. Picture frames lined the hallway. Eric as a child, holding a stuffed bear. Eric in his graduation robe. Eric on his wedding day. All the moments Joanne had lovingly preserved now stared back at her like echoes from another life. She sat down at the kitchen table and reached for her phone. More out of habit than need, she opened her banking app and paused. Eric's name appeared in places she had almost forgotten. On the property documents, on her medical contact forms, on a shared account. One of the cards linked to that account had collected over $3,000 in charges this month. Dining, gadgets, grooming purchases. It was never meant for everyday spending. She blinked, her thoughts catching up. That account was for emergencies, for stability, for her. Her chest tightened. Slowly, she opened a drawer and pulled out the latest mortgage notice. The balance had climbed. Late fees, interest. A warning circled in red ink. And that's when she understood. She wasn't just helping anymore. She was holding it all up. Silently, without thanks. Until it began to feel impossible. Joanne leaned back in her chair, one hand resting against her heart. Not out of panic, not even sadness. But something inside had simply gone still. She looked around. The house she had once filled with warmth now felt like a backdrop to someone else's story. Every cushion, photo, and well-loved object seemed to belong to a time when connection felt mutual. Now it felt like he passed through when it suited him. Her presence, her help, expected, not acknowledged. There was no outburst, no breaking point, just a quiet shift, like dust settling on a forgotten picture frame. If you've ever felt yourself slowly fade from someone's world, not from anger, but from convenience, you know what that moment feels like. She didn't speak it, but the thought settled inside her. I felt less like a mother, and more like someone always expected to catch him when he fell. And even that role was wearing thin. Joanne didn't arrive at a decision in one sharp moment. There was no single spark. It was more like unthreading something that had been unraveling for years. Quietly, one loop at a time. It started with a question she hadn't asked in ages. What would my life be if it didn't revolve around fixing his? She sat alone in her study, surrounded by forms and folders, with his name printed more than hers, his name on the mortgage, his name on the card, his name listed at her doctor's office, his name on the house she alone had paid off. She had given him everything. Somewhere along the way, that became something he relied on, without asking. That same afternoon, she called a lawyer. A calm, steady woman named Carla, who didn't react when Joanne said, "I think I need to take some things back." They sat together for 2 hours. Joanne brought everything, statements, agreements, signatures she no longer recognized as her own decisions. Carla mostly listened, turning pages, writing brief notes. By the end of the meeting, Joanne had signed forms to remove Eric from shared property and financial ties, create a personal trust in her own name, submit a quiet review of her financial records. It wasn't loud, but it mattered. There was no applause, no music, just the hum of a printer and the steady scratch of a pen on paper. Later that night, Joanne stood brushing her teeth, same as always. But her reflection felt unfamiliar in a good way. Her eyes weren't softer, they were focused. She didn't feel guilty. She felt present. There's a moment when love shifts, when it stops being connection and starts becoming a responsibility too heavy to carry alone. She had crossed that line long ago. Only now did she realize it. If you've ever opened your eyes and whispered, "What if I stopped saying yes?" you'll know how she felt in that law office. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. She was reclaiming something long overdue, her name, her home, her say. That night, she didn't tuck her phone under her pillow. She no longer needed to be on standby for someone who didn't show up when she needed him. She didn't post about it, didn't send a message, didn't call. She simply began to pack. One suitcase, a folder of important papers, and a leather-bound journal she hadn't opened in years. 2 weeks later, she handed the house keys to a local agent with a quiet nod and said, "It's time someone else made memories here." Then she boarded a quiet flight to Charleston. No return ticket, no forwarding address. Her new place was small. A cottage near the dunes, hidden just enough to feel like hers. It smelled like ocean salt and sun-warmed wood. The kind of place no one would think to search for her. And that was the point. Each morning, she woke to the sound of waves instead of notifications. She walked the shore before breakfast, her feet bare, her breath steady. She drank coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug. No errands, no bank transfers, no saving anyone but herself. She joined a local workshop at the library. Financial freedom for women over 60. On the first day, she listened. By the third, she spoke. By the second week, she was invited to teach. She didn't brag. She didn't list credentials. She simply told the truth. How she'd drained her savings to fund her son's businesses. How she stood by quietly while her name became a signature on documents she never read. How she stopped asking for thanks because it felt selfish to want it. And how one day, she finally said no. The women in the room didn't cry. They nodded. They recognized the story, not because it was hers, but because it had once been theirs too. One woman whispered, "I thought I was alone." Joanne just smiled. "You're not. If you've ever spent years being needed but never valued, then you know this kind of rebirth. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with peace. The quiet kind, the sturdy kind, the kind you don't realize you are missing until it fills the room." She didn't call Eric. She didn't respond to his messages. She blocked his number. Not out of hate, out of healing. She lit a candle every evening, not in prayer, but in recognition that she was still here, that she had survived, that she didn't need anyone to see her to finally feel seen. She had saved herself, and that was enough. The letter arrived 2 months after Joanne disappeared from the city. No return address, no signature, just 6 handwritten words on plain white paper. "Mom, I need you. Please help." She read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and slid it into a manila folder labeled "Documentation for legal use." She didn't cry. She didn't respond. She simply placed it next to the affidavit of financial fraud she had already prepared. Back in Charleston, her life had settled into something gentle. Mornings at the beach, afternoons hosting small circles of women at the library, evenings sipping tea by candlelight, watching the sea stretch out past the horizon. She didn't talk about Eric anymore, not out of bitterness, but because he no longer lived at the center of her story. But then one evening, the television buzzed to life with breaking news. Real estate developer Eric Mitchell arrested for fraudulent use of parental financial documents. IRS confirms federal charges pending. There it was, his mugshot, hollow eyes, wrinkled shirt, a man who had never believed the ground could shift beneath him, until it did. Joanne stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Later that week, her lawyer sent over a draft of her final will. The updated one. The one that no longer listed Eric anywhere. Instead, 80% of her assets would go to legal aid organizations for women over 60. The rest to a trust for financial literacy programs in public libraries. At the bottom of the page, her lawyer had added a simple line. "Do you want to leave a note to explain this?" Joanne shook her head. "No. Let silence explain it." She signed the will with a calm hand. And that evening, as the sun slipped beneath the water, she lit her candle, opened her journal, and wrote, "He left me at the airport like luggage. I left him with every door closed, and I didn't need applause. I needed peace. And now I have it." If you've ever been erased quietly, I hope this story reminded you. You don't need to be loud to reclaim your worth. You just need to stop waiting for someone to see you and finally start seeing yourself. Have you ever walked away without slamming the door and found that silence was the loudest answer of all? Tell me your story below. Someone like Joanne might need to hear it.